Today we're going to speak about the 12th principle of faith, which is the Messianic era. I had to phrase this very carefully because the whole concept of the Messianic era has to be understood in balance. Messianism has often been a very awful force in the world, and one of the key aspects of Torah is that it is a balanced expression of the divine will. And so we have to understand these concepts very, very clearly. So with no further ado, we can ask questions like, we have the idea of the ultimate redemption, and we have ideas about Mashiach, the Messiah himself. How do we get all this in proportion? What's more important? Very often, the idea of a Messiah is considered as a concept unto itself that seems to be disconnected from everything else. But we have to understand it in the context that the Torah gives it to us. And the way we can do that is by looking at what the Torah has to say about the topic of Geula, or redemption. One passage that comes to mind is in our first source, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 3 through 5. The verses state, "Then the Lord your God will turn your captivity." The way that is stated in Hebrew is, "V'shav Hashem Elokecha et shavutecha," that Hashem will restore the people who are in Shevi, in captivity. What does that mean? Here we're talking about the ingathering of the exiles. This is a fundamental feature of Geula. "Have compassion upon you, will return and gather you from all the nations amongst whom the Lord your God has scattered you. And lest you think that God can't do this if you're in outer West Mongolia," the verses continue to say that even if your outcasts be at the utmost parts of heaven, it doesn't matter how far away they are. And how far away can mean many things. How geographically far away they are, or how much time has passed since their feet have trod on the soil of Eretz Israel. How many generations have passed? How assimilated and how acculturated and how ensconced they are in the various different cultures that they have been exiled to. People here have taken ancestry DNA tests. If you haven't taken one, it's a very interesting thing to see the results, because if you have a good test, it'll give you a map of the world where your ancestors have been for, hundreds, if not thousands of years. And you'll be amazed, actually, sometimes, that, I had no idea I had Japanese blood in me, type of thing. I mean, I've seen people find that, wow, actually, they find that, from the genetic haplogroup they belong to, that part of their ancestry was the Ainu tribes that at one point lived in Japan and crossed the Bering Strait from what is now Russia into what is now Alaska, and inhabited North America for thousands of years. And at some point, one of them bumped into a relative from France, and that's their line. I remember actually, Ephraim, you, I think, once published your results, and it seems like your family has pretty much stayed put. Like, Yeah, they're Scandinavian. And Dutch. I don't know. Maybe you found something surprising in there. But sometimes you will find that people's family genealogies are very come from very far flung places. And what we're seeing here in the verse is that it doesn't matter. Meaning to say, we're talking about something that is essentially miraculous, the ingathering of the exiles. If your outcast be at the utmost parts of heaven, from there will the Lord your God gather you, and from there will he fetch you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. We're talking about a restoration of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Now, no matter what your political position is on the state of Israel, or the politics involved, or the conflicts in the Middle East, etc., and I'm saying this also for my religious Jewish brothers and sisters who, the issue of the state of Israel has been a very contentious one within the Jewish community, mostly because of the secular nature of the state as opposed to the religious nature of the Jewish people. Nevertheless, there is not one of us who can't see what is obvious, that in the 20th century, after 6 million Jews were murdered, that was literally 1/3 of the world's Jewish population. It was destroyed in a very short period of time. And right afterwards, we had a restoration of the Jewish people to the land of Israel in such a manner that, as the verse says over here, you shall possess it. Okay. And the Jewish people do possess the land of Israel today. Not all of it, but they do possess it. And they have an army and a navy and an air force that protects it, at least from the standpoint of what we would call derech hateva, from in the natural sense. Of course, we know Tamid Einei Hashem ala aretz mireshit hashana v'ad achrit hashana. The eyes of God are on the land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So we know where our protection actually comes from. But here we are, and it turns out that the place on earth that has the largest Jewish population is in the land of Israel at this point in time. Phenomenal. Nobody can deny that big things are happening. Okay, going back to our texts. Now, one of the exercises I often do with therapy clients, I'm a logotherapist. I was trained in the method that was conceived by Viktor Frankl, and he suggests an exercise called the Ecce Homo exercise. It used to be that the Romans would build arches for their heroes, and on the arches you could see all their various accomplishments. One thing that's very unique in terms of, from a Torah perspective, is the Arch of Titus, which stands in the Circus Maximus in Rome, which details the Romans carrying off all the spoils of the temple under the aegis of Titus. Now, nevertheless, when a person leaves this world, we see what their accomplishments are because they usually write them on gravestones, on headstones. And so sometimes, in order to get to what is the most important thing, what are your most important values, we can ask somebody, what would you like to have written on your headstone? Sounds like a morbid exercise, but it actually brings the thing front and center. And Ecce Homo means behold the man. That is what is written, I believe, on the arches as well. Behold this person. At the end of their life, what do they want to leave in this world? What is the legacy they want to leave? So we have a kind of a litmus test like that in the Gemara in Tractate Shabbat, page 31a, Rava said, after departing from this world, when a person is brought to judgment for the life he lived in this world, they say to him in order of the verse, there's a verse that was quoted here, did you conduct your business faithfully? What does that mean? That means that you believe that God is the one who provides you with a livelihood, and therefore your business dealings are honest and straight, and you're not trying to connive anything out of anybody. Another thing that they ask, did you designate times for Torah studies? Know that there is a mitzvah for Jews to study Torah and to fix times for Torah study. Did you engage in procreation? Meaning to say, right, did you have children? Did you believe in the redemptive future of the world so that you brought children into it in order for them to share in that? And this last question is, Tzipita liyeshua. Did you await salvation? Now that's a very interesting question. Did you wait for salvation? There seems to be an interesting requirement for people to wait for salvation, to anticipate, to look forward to a time of redemption. Okay, so now we see that the idea of human history, of world history, is not endless from a Torah perspective, that there is a certain period of time that we operate under these conditions, and meaning to say that humanity will move from this state that we're in now, in Olam Hazeh, in this world, to a different spiritual state at some point in the future. That there are sort of modular segments of world history. And we are right now in Olam Hazeh, but we are awaiting the next phase as well. And the next phase is the redemptive phase. Okay, so we have an idea that that geula, that redemption, that transition to a higher consciousness, to a higher state, is baked into Torah sources. We've seen it in the written and the oral Torah so far. And then we have to consider an important element of that redemptive process, which is the idea of Mashiach, the Messiah. Unlike the kind of conversation you would find elsewhere in other religions, we don't sit here talking about that all the time. I don't really want to address Christianity in this lecture. I don't want to mention anything from there. But Christ is the Greek word for Messiah, which means that Christianity must be a preoccupation, like a complete preoccupation with it, right? We have to see this concept in context as when it pertains to Torah. Now we see a verse in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, that says as follows. This is a prophecy of Bilam, who was essentially an enemy of Klal Yisrael, and had been hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse the Jewish people. Apparently, there was never, it said, Lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe. Never again did there ever arise a prophet in Israel who was like Moses. And the sages teach us, but amongst the nations, there did arise a prophet like this. Somebody who had some very massive power of prophecy, and I guess the ability also to bring about spiritual destruction. And that was Bilam. But as we see there in the Torah, God did not allow him to carry out his plans and changed all of his curses into blessings. And then he prophesied to Balak the following: I see him, but not now. I behold him, but it is not near. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Shet, which is Seth. This verse points to the Messiah. And we have in source number 4, Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, Laws of Kings and Wars, chapter 11, he breaks down the verses. I see it, but not now. This refers to David. I perceive it, but it not in the near future. This refers to the Messianic king. So basically what you're seeing right from the outset, the Rambam is setting this up so that you're looking at the beginning and the culmination of the Messianic process. A star shall go forth from Jacob. This refers to David. And a staff shall arise in Israel. This refers to the Messianic king. Crushing all of Moab's princes. This refers to David, as we see in 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 2. It says he smote Moab and measured them with a line. Decimating all of the descendants of Seth. This refers to the Messianic king, about whom we see in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10, he says he will rule from sea to sea. Edom will be demolished. This is another prophecy. This refers to David also in 2 Samuel, where it says that Edom became the servants of David. And Seir, which is where the B'nai Esav reside, will be destroyed. This is something that we see in the prophecy of Obadiah. There's only one chapter in Obadiah. It's verse 21. It says and this is something that we have in our liturgy every day, the Alu Moshim B'Har Tzion Lishpot et Har Esav, that there will be saviors that ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau. And this is how the Rambam breaks it down. So what you're seeing in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, is a clear prophecy, a source, prophetic source for the idea of the Messiah. And here is that verse in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem, behold, thy king comes to thee. He is just and victorious, humble and riding upon a donkey, and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. And I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off. And he shall speak peace to the nations, and his dominion shall be from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. So here we're seeing in that verse almost like we positively identify this person called Mashiach as our king. And he has these qualities. He's just, tzaddik. And in the verse it says the nosha. They've translated it here as victorious, but truthfully, nosha means he has the ability to save. And when I say save, I mean quite literally save. The Mashiach is going to be somebody who will be able to fight the wars of God in the literal sense of it. On the other hand, he will be humble. Riding upon a donkey is an allusion to his humility, as opposed to riding on a gigantic Clydesdale horse, like you'd see in the Budweiser commercials. Mashiach is somebody who comes humbly. It's very similar, if you think about it, to the character of Moses. who was known in the Torah as Ani Mikol Adam, Asher Ba'aretz, the most humble man on the earth. That's not a small designation for somebody. In fact, who wrote that verse? Who was the one who took it down? This should tell you something about true humility. Somebody who has that level of humility can actually say about himself that he's the most humble man on earth. Okay, so we see a similar quality in Mashiach as well. And I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim. That Ephraim generally refers to the area inhabited by the 10 tribes of what was the northern kingdom of Israel, and the horse from Jerusalem referring to the kingdom of Judah. Right? In other words, at one point, Israel split into two kingdoms. The 10 tribes were taken away, leaving the other two, plus the tribe of Levi. But here, the cutting off of the chariot and the horse refers to God protecting these places from attack from the outside. Okay. And now the verse turns to what's going to be with this person. He shall speak peace to the nations. Diber shalom lagoyim. And we're speaking about ushering in an era of peace that will not end, essentially. Humanity will have finally reached that place where we have world peace that's enduring and lasting. And his dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. And that's going to unite all of humanity. So, in other words, we go from the specific to the general. Mashiach is not just coming for the Jewish people, although that is principally, that's his first stop. We're talking about the restoration of the Jewish people to Eretz Israel. Did he do it? We'll have to see. We have to really understand what is his role in all of this. We know at this point in time, having seen the sources that we've seen, that there is a redemptive process, that there's a concept of Geula, that an element of Geula is the ingathering of the exiles, that another aspect of the Geula is the arrival of a Messianic king who transforms the world into a place of peace. Okay, so we see that world peace is another aspect of Geula and Mashiach. Now, if you look in the next source is a quote from Yigdal. We've been looking at Yigdal for the duration of this whole series because Yigdal has been written in order to essentially go over the 13 principles before prayer. And this one corresponds to the 12th principle of faith. Yishlach l'keitz hayamin mishichenu. God will send his anointed one at the end of days. Lifdot mechake keitz yishuato. To redeem those who await his ultimate salvation. This corresponds to the piece that we read in the Gemara in Shabbat, that this is one of the questions that's asked of people when they've departed from this world. Did you await salvation? The people who did await salvation will be redeemed in this way with the coming of Mashiach. That's kind of like the reward for waiting for him. We'll get back to that. And then there's another restatement of the 13 principles of faith that we see at the end of the morning prayers. Ani mamin, I believe. These are statements that are made. These are 13 statements that begin with the words Ani mamin, I believe, be'emuna shlema, with perfect faith, complete faith, in the coming of the Messiah. And even though he may tarry, which means even though it appears that he is long in coming. Nevertheless, I yearn every day for his coming. That the yearning itself has a value. That the desiring Mashiach to come is in and of itself value. Make note of this, because here we would think that, what is yearning? Yearning is not a ritual act. No, it's not a ritual act, but it's an orientation that we're supposed to have, that we want this world to come to its proper fulfillment, proper completion, as a place for the dwelling of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. We want to make this world comfortable for Hashem, so that he can dwell in it in a very revealed sense. You have certain relatives that when they come over, you have to clean up the house and put away all the broken pictures on the wall, and just make sure that, because they're not going to be comfortable otherwise if everything's all over the place. When there is strife amongst people, when there's evil in the world, when there is avodah zarah, when there's idolatry in the world, that's not a world that's comfortable for God to come and manifest his presence. So we want to make it nice for him. So therefore we have to have this kind of an orientation that we want to progress towards this point. And we would do whatever it takes to help that along. Okay, so what's interesting about the statements from Yigdal and the Ani Mamin statement is that it seems to leave out the whole context of the Geula and zero in on the Messiah, on Mashiach, and the importance of waiting for him. So we have to see, how do these elements interact? The Rambam describes for us in his commentary on the Mishnah of Sanhedrin chapter 10, in the first Mishnah, where all the principles are brought, that the Rambam brings in his commentary on the Mishnah in Sanhedrin chapter 10, in the first Mishnah, which is which is our source for all the 13 principles of faith as articulated by the Rambam. We have the 12th principle. Now, he says, what is the 12th principle? He says, Yemot HaMashiach, which is a fascinating set of words. He does not say the belief in the coming of Mashiach. He says the belief in Yemot HaMashiach, in the Messianic era. We're going to have to put our thinking caps on and try to understand, why does the Rambam express it that way? Let's read on. Rambam says the era of the Messiah, which is to believe and affirm that he will come, and not to think that he will arrive late. What we saw in the Ani Mamin statement above was Af al pi sheyitma mea, even if it seems like he's waiting to come, like it's like he's late. But the Rambam tells us that we should not think that the arrival of the Messiah will be late. It'll be exactly when Hashem wants it to be. If he is long in coming, says the Rambam, one must wait. Now, also, one should not set times, nor should one make calculations as to the time of his arrival based on Torah verses. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there are many people who like to go into Torah sources and verses and try to point out, when they go into Sefer Daniel, and where it appears that a precise time is given for the coming of the Messiah. And virtually all of the commentators on those verses state openly that we have absolutely no idea, even based on these verses, when that will be. And there are many, many different ways that we can interpret these things. And therefore, it doesn't make any sense to look at the verse and say, oh, I've got it. It's going to be this year, on this date, on this. Don't do that. Why shouldn't you do that? Well, first and foremost, because it could be very disappointing when you find out that, no, not this year. And I can't tell you, it happens in our community as well, where this happened. There's a lot of cataclysmic things that go on in the world. And when things happen and they're cataclysmic, there's always this sense that something big must be right around the corner. Something big must be coming. Well, something big is coming. But we don't know exactly when. And there have been many false messiahs in the history of the Jewish people. One of which has brought incredible pain into the world and incredible destruction, not only for the Jewish people, but for the world at large. The Rambam goes into detail. I'm not going to quote it here, but he does say that everything that we believe about God, that there's only one of him, that there will be a redemptive process, that there are no other gods besides him, was completely undone for the rest of humanity through one of these false messiahs. We also had, in the 17th century, a false messiah by the name of Shabbatai Tzvi, who was widely believed to be the Messiah. There were horrible events that took place in the 17th century, one of which was were the Khmelnytsky massacres that took place in the Ukraine under Bogdan Khmelnytsky, Yimach Zichro, and all the other persecutions that were happening across Europe. And somebody arose who came originally from, I think, Smyrna, what is now Turkey, and went to Eretz Israel and was proclaimed to be the Messiah. And he had just a side note, because of the moment that we're in, his Gabbai, as it were, his spokesperson, was somebody by the name of Natan Ha'azati, which means that Natan came from Gaza, because there was an enormous Jewish community in Gaza at the time. Gaza figures very prominently in places that some of our major figures have lived in. In any case, his picture would often adorn the Sephorim and Sidurim, the Jewish holy books, prayer books at the time, used to have his picture on it. That's how widespread this became. But he went back to Istanbul to declare to the Sultan there that the Ottoman Turks were at that time in control of Eretz Israel, and he, being the quote-unquote Mashiach, wanted it to be given back to him. So he told the Sultan about this, and the Sultan said, I'll make you a counter offer. You'll convert to Islam, or I'll shoot you through with 150 arrows. And the next day, Shabbatai Tzvi, the vaunted Messiah of Israel, converted to Islam. And that started a chain of horrible events. There were people who were already on their way to Eretz Israel, would sort of thumb their noses up at the local people, saying, okay, guys, we're out of here. We've been in exile long enough. and had taken all their possessions. And then it turned out that it was a false Messiah, and they had nothing to go back to, and they were just stuck on their way. And then there were all these massacres and persecutions that took place that century. And it was a terrible, terrible, terrible moment. So, and it's happened after that as well with Jacob Frank, and every time this happens, it's bad. So we don't get involved in trying to figure out when that's going to be, what year, what day, or that this particular world event portends the coming of the Mashiach. We wait. We cultivate an attitude of yearning impatience for him to come. So continuing on, the sages have said in the Gemara in Sanhedrin 97b, may those who calculate the end of days be cursed. This was really not considered a good thing by the sages. One must believe that the Messiah will be a man of advantage, stature, and honor. This person will have impeccable character traits. It's not going to be just anybody who wears a t-shirt that says, I'm the Messiah. And he has these qualities above all kings that have ever existed. In accordance with what has been prophesied by all prophets from Moses to Malachi. Those are all of the prophets. Peace be upon them. And then the Rambam says, whomever doubts this or diminishes the stature of the Messiah actually denies the Torah, which has testified about him in Parshat Bilam and also in the Parsha of Atem Nitzavim. And we've seen passages from both of those Parshiot earlier. Included in this principle is that there will only be a king in Israel from the house of David. The Messiah has to be a descendant of the house of David. It's important to note that the way we understand lineage of that kind is that it's paternal lineage. There's a verse in L'mishpachotam leveit avotam that in terms of tribal affiliation, it goes L'mishpachotam according to their families, leveit avotam according to their fathers' houses. You have to have paternal lineage dating back to King David, who is from the tribe of Judah, in order to be Mashiach. If somehow you were born of a virgin, it means you don't have paternal lineage. And survey says, sorry, buddy. And specifically from the descendants of his son, King Solomon. And also that anyone who disputes the status of this family denies the name of God and words of his prophets. We see the name David in connection with the Messiah all over the prophets. So it has to be from this family. Continuing on the idea of the Messiah's qualifications, the Rambam lays it out for us. He says as follows in the Mishnah Torah, Laws of Kings and Wars, chapter 11, if a king will arise from the house of David, who diligently contemplates the Torah and observes its mitzvot, as prescribed by the written law and the oral law, as David his ancestor, and he will compel all of Israel to walk in the way of the Torah and rectify the breaches in its observance, and fight the wars of God, we may with assurance consider him Mashiach. This is what is called Chezkat Mashiach. In other words, the way the Rambam says it in Hebrew is Harei zeh b'chezkat shehu Mashiach. We can presume that this person might be the Mashiach. This person is a suitable candidate for being Mashiach if he does all those things. Again, let's list that again. He is Hogeh Torah. He learns Torah, Osek b'mitzvot, and he's busy with the performance of mitzvot, just like his ancestor King David, in accordance with the Torah, shebichtav, the written Torah, and shebal peh, the oral Torah, and he compels the entire Jewish people to become observant again, and he fights the wars of God. That person can be presumed to be Mashiach. At least we can make the assumption that this is a suitable candidate, that he is the Mashiach. However, if he succeeds in the above, builds the temple in its place, and gathers the dispersed of Israel, this is the ingathering of the exiles, then Harei zeh Mashiach bivadai, this person is definitely Mashiach. So those are the qualifications. And then he goes on to say that he will then improve the entire world, motivating all the nations to serve God together, as we see in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. I will transform the peoples into a pure language, that they will all call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. Now, so we see we're going from the specific to the general. We see that the ultimate purpose of Mashiach is to bring a total rectification of humanity, and we see exactly who could be Mashiach and who is definitely Mashiach. The Rambam also states that if a person does not accomplish these things, and he dies without accomplishing any of these things, he is absolutely 100% not the Mashiach. And he says that we can see from the incident of Bar Kokhba, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there was a very powerful military leader by the name of Shimon Koziba, who, under his leadership, they were able to keep the Romans out of Jerusalem for 3 years. That's pretty tough. It said about his soldiers that he wouldn't take anybody who couldn't tear out a tree while he was riding on horseback. I mean, he had a band of rather mighty people, about 200,000 strong, and they managed to kick the Romans out of Jerusalem for 3 years. That's actually considered to be one of the kingdoms of Israel. Okay? And none other than somebody like Rabbi Akiva, who was one of our greatest Tani, one of our greatest sages, to this day, considered him to be Mashiach. He interpreted that verse that we saw before in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, which says, a star shall go forth from Jacob. In Hebrew, it's Dorach Kochav Miyakov. The star Kochav will go out of Jacob. And he understood that to mean Dorach Koziba Miyakov. In other words, that this person, Shimon ben Koziba, who became known as Bar Kokhba after this verse, where a star or Kochav comes out of Jacob, as far as Rabbi Akiva was concerned, his ability to fight the wars of God, at least, made it so that this person is most likely the Mashiach. Rabbi Akiva kad hava chame bar koziba hava amar dain hu malka Mashiach. Right? He said that when Rabbi Akiva saw him, he said, "This is him. This is the King Mashiach. This is the King Messiah." Thing is that it didn't work out very well. Number one, because the statements that he used to say, God, if you're not going to protect us, at least don't give victory to our enemies. That's a very problematic statement in terms of the faith that the Torah requires of us, because it's only God who protects us. And he sends emissaries in natural form, perhaps. But our faith is only in God. So that was one thing that actually caused his image to sour in the eyes of the sages at the time. Another thing was that his uncle, who was Rabbi Elazar ben Modoi, was somebody who he suspected of harboring military secrets and not giving them to him, and therefore in his rage he kicked Rabbi Elazar ben Modoi and killed him that way. At which point he pretty much lost the confidence of everybody, and then he was killed almost immediately thereafter in the Battle of Beitar. So with that, Rabbi Akiva was able to say, okay, not that one. As opposed to people who follow a Messiah, even though, again, they have not accomplished any of the things that the Messiah is supposed to accomplish. But Rabbi Akiva was one of the great sages. So that's what we expect from people like that. Another thing that we have to understand is that the Rambam is very adamant on this point, and it's based on this passage in the Gemara in Tractate Shabbat 63a. Shmuel said, there is no difference between this world, Olam Hazeh, and the Messianic era, except for the subjugation of exile, as the verse states, Ki lo yechdal evyon mikerav haaretz, for poverty will not cease from the land. Meaning to say that the kind of problems that we see in the world might still be here when the Mashiach comes, and that really the only difference is that the Jewish population of the world is not going to be under anybody else's leadership or rule other than Mashiach himself. We will be completely independent. Now, what's important about that? It actually causes us to beg a question. 1 second, didn't the Rambam himself say that Mashiach is going to rebuild the temple and with the ingathering of the exiles and everything else? Right. Rebuild the temple means that there are sacrificial offerings again, means that the whole process starts again. If there's going to be no difference between Olam Hazeh and the Messianic era, except for the exile, will cease to exist, then what's all this other stuff happening? I mean, does the Mashiach actually build the temple? Does the Mashiach himself actually create the ingathering of the exiles? Or is it that all these things are elements of the Messianic era? That we have leadership, that the temple is restored, and that the exile is finished, and that the exiles themselves are gathered into the land of Israel. That's the question that we have to ponder. But getting back to the topic of waiting for the Messiah, we have a verse in Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 3, for there is still a vision for the appointed time, and it speaks concerning the end, and does not lie. Though it tarry, right, though it takes a long time, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not delay. So we see there that it doesn't matter how long this takes. The important thing is that we maintain our attitude of waiting for it. We see also in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 8, and this is the verse that comes right before the one about the entire world becoming of one pure speech. Therefore wait for me, says the Lord, until the day that I rise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations, that I may assemble the kingdoms, to pour upon them my indignation, all my fierce anger, for the earth, all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. Interesting, because the next verse is talking about the complete rectification of humanity as one society, right? So what is this destruction that comes before that? So this is something that I think that we saw this was the basis really of our shiur about Sukkot and Noahides, that there is the war of Gog and Magog, where nations come up to wage war against Jerusalem and are completely vanquished by God. But then there will be a surviving remnant of the nations which will begin to participate in the worship of God as one society, to the extent even that they are required to come up and celebrate the festival of Sukkot, as we saw over there. And the commentary of the Metzudat David says, why are we being asked to wait for Mashiach? Who's speaking, and who is he speaking to? So we know that God is saying, wait for me. Who is he saying to wait for me? He's saying that to the Jewish people. And Metzudat David explains that since you have not repented, I will not hasten the redemption. Therefore, rather wait for me for that specific day when I arise to subjugate the nations and for the downfall of Gog. What we see from here is that there seem to be two tracks. There seems to be like the regular track and the fast track. If we do tshuva, hoil velo shavtem, because you did not do tshuva, because you didn't repent, lo emaher hageula, I won't hasten the redemption. I won't cause it to come faster, but it will come in its appointed time nonetheless. Right? It seems that based on the behavior of people, behavior of Klal Yisrael, Mashiach could come faster, or he could come at the appointed time. We know that world history has a span of 6,000 years, according to the sages of the Gemara. And we are now in the year 5784. So we're not that far away, meaning to say that Mashiach could come any time before year 6000, or he will come in the year 6000. Right? We are 220 something years away from that point. So what we see in the verse is that, listen, you have the choice. You can have it sooner than later, or you'll have it on time. But it will not be late, as the Rambam says. We also see a verse in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 18, which says, and therefore will the Lord wait that he may be gracious to you, and therefore will he be exalted that he may have mercy upon you. For the Lord is a God of judgment. Happy are all they that wait for him. Now here we could run into some really big problems, because these verses are there to teach you to wait for the Messiah, and the verses seem to be talking about waiting for God himself. Don't be fooled. These verses are referring to waiting for God, but God is not the Messiah, and the Messiah is not God. Very, very important that distinction be ironclad. When we say we are waiting for God, waiting for salvation, it includes all of the processes that occur in the Messianic era. The redemption itself, the gathering the exiles, the rebuilding of the temple, the coming of Mashiach are all elements in that process. That is why the Rambam began speaking about the 12th principle of faith by stating the words Yemot HaMashiach, the days of Mashiach, the time period, the zeitgeist of Mashiach. It's not just Mashiach. Mashiach is an instrument of salvation of God, just as the other elements of the process of Geula are aspects of God's salvation. And therefore, what we are waiting for is we are waiting for God's salvation. We are waiting for God's redemption, within which will be the Mashiach. And it says in the Radak, who's a commentary on the prophets, we said, Ashrei kol chochelo, happy are they that wait for him. Why? Because they'll be rescued, because they will be redeemed, because that is the reward for waiting for all of this, is that you'll experience it. It's a very interesting thing. We will see this in the next shiur, which is the final shiur in this series of the 13 Principles of Faith, which is about the resurrection of the dead. We'll see in the Gemara, it says that a person who doesn't believe in the resurrection of the dead will not be resurrected. In other words, part of the reward for our faith in these things is that we get to experience these things. And we see that in real life, right? There are a lot of people who simply, you'll hear people will say things very bohemian, like, I don't believe in love. And it's funny, they never seem to experience it, right? Or I don't believe that people can have altruistic intentions. And then they tend to experience a world of, a world of cruel nature, a world of conniving people, a world of people with self-interests, and they never get to see the true goodness of humanity. So here again, because we believe in these things, we will get to experience these things. And with all of the things that go on around us, we have to remember that no matter how dark it gets, the world's history is moving towards this moment. And if we have the patience to sit through all this and to remind ourselves, like the expression goes, behind every black cloud is a silver lining, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is geula at the end of this process of history. And we should all merit to see it together, to be able to take part in the redemptive process of humanity, and see the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. B'mehera v'yameinu amen.